Hello, hello. I'm Strider, your host here at Author in the Headlights, and I thank you for joining us today. And if you would like to hit that subscribe button down in the corner, you won't miss a single episode. Now, this morning, we have with us Rick Steinke. Rick, good morning.
Good morning to you, Strider, and thanks a lot for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
You bet, absolutely. And we met up at the Chanticleer Conference, the SIBA Awards, and you are an award-winning author. Woohoo! I like it.
Shocker, shocker, but definitely something I'm very, very grateful for, and so happy that I went to the award ceremony and it ended up the way that it did. So it's
Yeah,
great.
well, that means you did a good job, and I appreciate good writing, so more power to you.
Thank you, sir, very
Now,
much,
you have,
and congratulations on your award as well, by the way. So
thank you
yeah,
there. Yeah. Um, Now you wrote in your genre, I guess, global thriller, correct?
that's exactly right.
And the Jake Fortina series. But before we get into the story of that story, you spent a lifetime in Department of Defense, which gave you a great background for this type of book. Isn't that right?
That is absolutely correct, Strider. I spent 28 years in the United States Army. Half of that time was overseas. A lot of that time was with international forces. Starting as young as when I was a lieutenant, I was a liaison to a German artillery regiment. Later served with the Italian Mountain Troops. Ended up being the U.S. Defense Attaché to France at the end of my career. There was a deployment or two in between, but it was a lot of time, sort of working with foreign militaries, if you will, and in our embassy as well. And then I did another 14 years at a place called the George C. Marshall Center for European Security Studies, and that is a German-American partnership between their Ministry of Defense and our Department of Defense, located in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. And the mission there is basically to bring government officials together to fight terrorism, transnational organized crime, uh, cyber threats, basically any number of national security threats that you can think of. So, yeah, I spent a lot of time in that business, let's say. So that was very helpful, I think, in getting started down the road in this series.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
sir.
It's something that we here in America don't think enough about, actually. We're pretty stated in ourself, and we don't actually see a big world picture most of the time, but it's out there. And because of service like yours, we feel protected. And thanks.
Thank you, sir, very much. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it. And same to you. I know you've done a lot of service of a different type, but I know
Yep.
you've served a lot. So, um,
Firefighter, EMT, and
yep.
wildfire,
Oh,
U.S. Forest
that's
Service, many things. So I can understand how your background and history gives you that background knowledge in how to build that kind of story to where it's real. I mean, you feel like you're there.
indeed. No, it was very helpful in that regard for sure.
Also, you have some tremendous reviews from people that do know and wrote great reviews. One even says, it's like they're there as your attaché, and reading the story, you're right there with you. So good job.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, and I've been very blessed by those reviews, and I think you know how difficult it is to even get two reviews. So
Oh, absolutely, man. I tell
right,
you, when
and
you
I
read a book, please do a review. You out there in the audience, other writers, readers, do reviews because those authors need them. And that is such a big part of writing, having reviews that people look at and go, okay, that's a good book, huh? Because it's in the upper end of the numbers rather than the lower end of the
that's right,
numbers.
that's right, indeed. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly right.
All right.
Yeah.
So your series, your global thriller series is Jake Fortina, and give us some background on the story.
So Jake Fortina is basically he's just a regular guy. I mean, uh, he's let's just call him an ordinary army officer who goes through some trials and tribulations for sure in his younger years of service. Some tragedies also that he's got to overcome, both professional and some personal. And he ends up becoming what's called a foreign area officer, and that's an officer who's stationed overseas predominantly, works with foreign militaries, serves in, our U.S. embassies and our major commands abroad. And Fortina finds himself as a U.S. military attaché assigned to initially the U.S. Embassy in France in the first book, and then in the second book, he goes to the U.S. Embassy in Rome as well. And he's got to deal with some significant and often, Strider, very often behind the scenes national security stuff that we very often hear little about, which I guess was probably a good thing. And so he has to deal with those challenges as his service goes on.
All right. So it does give you, your background definitely ties into this kind of story where you know so much about it.
It does. People often ask me about sort of the authenticity and so forth. And what I typically tell them is about 2/3 of my books are either places I've been to, meetings I've been in, or things I've done. Whereas, the rest is Hollywood. It's the story. It's the creative part. It's the fun part, if you will. But there's certainly a lot of background, personal background there. Just a quick, for example, I did finish my Army service as the U.S. Senior Defense Representative and Defense Attaché to France. And in my service, I also served for a tour with the Italian mountain infantry troops, the Alpini. And NATO used to have an allied mobile force, which I'm sure they're strongly considering bringing it back based on recent events, which was intended to, if the Soviet Union and or the Russians eventually, were to decide to attack anywhere along NATO's front, NATO countries, that battalion, that Italian mountain infantry battalion, was part of a 7-country brigade, which would have been the first to deploy. So we trained everywhere from the Arctic Circle all the way down to southern Italy to do some stuff against the mafia as well for the Italian government. So it was let's just say, very, very broadening experience.
First contact service there. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You got 2 books out. This
Right.
second book, Jake Fortina and the Roman Conspiracy, is the award winner this time. This one you just got. But Major Jake Fortina and Tier 1 Threat. Now that was out prior. That's the first book of the series.
That's correct. That starts in Paris. That's right. And that is, without telling too much about the story, but it's about one of our, let's say, perennial enemies who's trying to develop a virus, which is worse than 10 times worse than COVID, and twice as bad as Spanish flu 2.0. And I don't know if you know about the old Spanish flu, but it killed like 50 million people around the planet. It was, one of the most devastating viruses, pandemics we've ever had. And so they're trying to develop that and deploy it against the United States, Israel, and Jews around the world. So that's that major threat. And then the second one is basically takes place from the U.S. Embassy in Rome, where it's a different kind of a threat. This one from a Russian oligarch, a runaway Russian oligarch who lives in Italy and who wants to go back to the Kremlin and to, let's say, be harsher, be stronger, and be more threatening than the current occupant. And so that's the other big crisis that he finds himself involved in both circumstances.
And so interest to readers is not only is it a great story, but it is also a timely story of what's happening in the world and recognition of those things and seeing what could happen, development of situations that we do confront continuously and deal with and keep ourselves safe. So I appreciate it. And that means it's
especially
a good story.
In the latter circumstance, Strider, especially in the second one, very, very close to reality, let's say. So
now I would ask you what's next, except after is what's first, right? You have Next Mission, but wasn't that already published?
Next Mission is actually a memoir of my time in France as the U.S. Defense Attaché, and that will be coming out again. It looks like we're going to have it out again in February in a revised edition. I've added some chapters, made some changes to it. It's been out of print. I think there are some books still out there on the secondary market that you can get, but I'm going to go back out there and start afresh, if you will, with that one.
Sure.
Which was also, not badly rated actually at the end of the day. But before next mission goes back out on August 20th of this month, I have my third Jake Fortina book, which will be Change of Mission. And in this particular Fortina book, it will be more of a direct threat, if you will, and more of a personal threat to Jake and his Italian carabinieri bride, Sarah Simonetti. So it's going to be a lot about Italy. It's going to be a lot about the confluence of terrorism and organized crime, and those kind of serious real world threats that we're constantly keeping our eye on and constantly trying to defeat before they become something serious.
All right. So book 3 is coming out. You're going back with the prequel, kind of a sideline thing with Next Mission, coming out with that again. And yes, we do get better as we write. So I can see going back to the early book and cleaning it up, tightening it up, and making it even more
exactly.
better.
That's exactly right, 100%. Just to make a bit of a better product, bring it a little bit closer to home in terms of publication and so forth. So yeah, that's all part of the deal.
Be sure to get a hold of me when that book comes out this
Thank you,
summer
sir.
or fall of whatever it is, when it comes there, and we'll make sure we get that online at Durham and Publishing's bookstore, and where all your books will be available through there. So for the user out there want to see it, log on to durhamandpublishing.com and go to the bookstore, and you'll be able to find it under Rick Steinke. And Rick, I expect to see you back at Award-Winning Circle upcoming, and maybe we'll even shake hands on the stage.
I'd love to see you again there. I hope that does come to pass. Just to, be there, even as just a finalist would be
It's pretty cool.
That's very cool. It's very cool. Great people. Love it.
Yep. And for you writers out there, you could always look up Chanticleer International Book Awards and put your books into that set. There's a bunch of them they review every year. So when you make it to the top, you've done your job, done it right. Rick, I hope to see more of you in the future. I'm sure I will. And when your next book comes out, we may have to bump into you again.
Thank you, sir. And I hope we do.
And for those of you out there, thanks for joining us today at Author in the Headlights, sponsored by durhamandpublishing.com. Check out their books. Check out our podcast there.
Right,
check out the
right.
author's resources page for all the things you might need as an author to get your book published. So until next time, I'm Strider, your host here at Author in the Headlights. Thank you for joining us. Rick, thanks for being with us.
Thanks again, Strider. I really appreciate it.